Hello and welcome to my Quick Start Bootcamp for Lightroom Classic. I'm Brent Bergherm and I'm glad you're here. We're going to take you from nothing to pretty much everything you need to know to get started in Lightroom Classic. This is a video series that's geared towards beginners, but if you have a little bit of experience in Lightroom already, maybe there's still something that is of interest to you because we are going to cover quite a bit, especially once we get past this first set of just setting up the catalog and understanding how things work. But once we get into the library and develop module, there's going to be a little bit of a kind of a deep dive in what we do. Now, to those of you who are complete beginners, you're probably saying, catalog? What's that? I don't know what you're talking about, Brent. Back up a little bit. So let's do that. Lightroom Classic works off of a catalog-based system, which means that this is a central repository for all of your information for all of the images that you bring into Lightroom. If you don't have this catalog operational, it simply doesn't work. That's the only way to work with Lightroom Classic is having this catalog. Now, what do we mean by the catalog? What do we mean by central information and all this kind of stuff? Well, it's pretty much just that. If you have an image in Lightroom, there's a record of it in your catalog, and the catalog keeps track of all your images wherever they are on the system. And I should say most of your images, because as we get through, you'll start to understand really what I mean by that. But by and large, if it's an image that you want to manage and you want to keep track of, definitely it's got a record in the catalog. So one rule of thumb to be thinking of right off the bat, if you're going to use the Lightroom Classic, definitely don't do anything to your images outside of Lightroom. And what I mean by that is moving them to a different folder, renaming them, working on them in a different piece of software, anything along those lines. You let Lightroom be your launching point. Let it be your starting point for all of the work that you do. Now, when we're going to look at exporting these images from Lightroom, that's where things change. But we're not going to get to that point just yet. We're going to stick right here with this idea of the catalog and how to best utilize all these things in Lightroom so we can maximize our use of it and hopefully have a good time doing so. So let's think about, where do we save this catalog? If you have a desktop machine or maybe just a single notebook computer, it's probably the best to go ahead and just put it on your internal hard drive. If you are like me and you want to be portable, you want to be able to open up your catalog on any computer that has Lightroom, then you probably want to put it on an external hard drive like I do. There is likely going to be a little bit of a performance hit when you do that. This is a USB 3 hard drive. It's pretty fast, but still, there's sometimes that I'm working and I can work faster than Lightroom works sometimes. That's just the way it is. Especially if you're building previews, this can take a little while sometimes, and that's where it's a trade-off, because I've decided I want that flexibility. I want to be able to have it to be something that I take, whether it's to a computer that's in the office, a computer here at home, whatever the case is, I want to be able to take this to any computer that has Lightroom and be able to run it. Now, with that said too, if you've got a dual computer system where you have a notebook that you can take on the road with you, and you've got a standard desktop type machine that you leave, of course, at home, this is a fantastic way of doing that, where you can go from one to the other without any problems, without any exporting of catalogs or any other jumping through other hoops that you might have to do in order to make this thing work. But when you do that, you want to make sure you have really close, or if not the absolute exact same version of Lightroom on both machines, because every major update to Lightroom will have little shifts, little updates, got to upgrade your catalog kind of a thing. And then, of course, you can't open it then on that previous version of Lightroom. So as they make updates, you just keep both computers in sync and you're going to be fine. All right, so let's get started with putting this hard drive on the system and getting our catalog set up. All right, so I just plugged in that hard drive and I'm going to start Lightroom now. And when I go over here and I click on the Lightroom item, it comes up with this little error dialog box saying the last catalog that I tried to have open that I was working on, well, it's not available. If you are starting Lightroom for the very first time, you'll probably see something a little more like this, or it might even just say, hey, there is no catalog at all. Let's create a new one. And that's going to be looking like this, where it's just going to say, okay, where do you want to save it? And this might feel a little bit confusing. You're just like, well, what's going on? I don't know where do I put it? What is this thing? It wants me to just create this catalog. Well, again, that's where all of our image information is going to be held. So let's just find a place where it's going to sit nicely for us, and well, I guess not forget where it's located either. Of course, Lightroom does a fantastic job of remembering where all of our different catalogs are found. All right, let's go ahead, and I'm going to do this right on the root of this Photos MK4 drive. And I'm just going to call it Bootcamp Sample. So if I hit that create, it'll spend a few seconds creating the folder structure and getting it figured out. And let's go ahead, we're going to bring up a Finder window that has this hard drive on it. And here we go. So you can see I've got other things on this hard drive. And so you might think too, well, should I have a hard drive that is just my Lightroom catalog and my images? Should I put my images elsewhere? What's the best practice for doing these things? So my practice for that, my real catalog, the one that I use for everything, is actually here on this MK6 drive. And you can see I just have a folder called Lightroom Catalog. Of all the photos that are in this catalog and managed by Lightroom, I only have family photos. I have my main photos, which is where everything else is. And then I have what I call raw scans, or I could call this like initial import, initial whatever you want to call that. Only those 3 folders actually have anything to do with my real Lightroom catalog. But let's go back to where we were. If you are having a dedicated hard drive, that's probably your best practice. But as you can see on my other hard drive, I got a lot of other things on there. That's a 4 terabyte drive, and I got a lot of things on there. As my library of information grows, I will definitely be expanding things out into other hard drives, and they will then take, okay, one hard drive for this purpose, one hard drive for that purpose. And that's just kind of, to me, it makes sense. I'll buy a hard drive when I need it. Now, another thing to think about quickly is the idea of backups, because you might be looking at that and saying, you've got everything there. I've got a backup here, and I've got a backup at my work office. So I've got both the offsite taken care of and the multiple copies of data taken care of. To me, that's a good sound practice, and basically I'm comfortable. It's good enough. All right, we're going to open up this folder, and we're going to take a quick look here at exactly what it did. So it gave us this Bootcamp Sample LRCat. That's the actual catalog itself. We have the previews. So when Lightroom creates JPEG data, JPEG previews, this is where it's going to hold it. And then some helper data and other things like that. Once your catalog gets really mature and you've been around a while and you've learned Lightroom really good and things are going like crazy for you, you're going to have a catalog that's a little more like this. All right, so here's my catalog file that's for everything. I've got an additional file that we haven't seen before, Smart Previews. We'll learn a little bit about that in the coming videos, but then here's my standard previews. They're the standard previews data, and you can see that's 36, almost 36 and a half gigabytes of data. And my standard catalog, that's 700 and almost 60 megabytes of data. So lots of data going on here in just this catalog alone. And then I have Lightroom generated backups here. So all those backups, they're just there in case something happens to my catalog and I want to have something really quickly where I can either rebuild it or I can just go back in time a little bit. But also, if I were truly to have a problem with my catalog file, I would be going to my Time Machine backup, because that's probably something that's even more recent than what I have Lightroom generate for me. This Lightroom generated catalog backup is convenient to have, but it's not something that I have it do every single time. It just takes too long for it to create that when I'm just trying to eject the drive and go kind of a thing. So there's one more thing I want to take a look at before we sign off for this video, and that is simply the catalog settings. So we're going to go up here into the menu item, Lightroom Classic, catalog settings, and go through a few of these items. There's some that we're going to skip over. So the first item under general, it just simply tells us the folder where it's going to be, and if I hit show, it just brings it up in a Finder window. And it says, here's your folder. That's where all the stuff is for this catalog. It shows me when it was created, the size of the catalog, things like that. But here we go with the backup idea. Again, this is the Lightroom generated backup, the one that is only on the exact same hard drive that everything else is on. So if you have a hard drive failure, what good does this do? This is about a matter of convenience, and so it's something that I like to have simply as a matter of convenience. But after a while, let's face it, when I have those backups going, well, there aren't any right now, but when I have those backups going, so let's go take a look at my other one. This could just load up like crazy. So you can see here, my oldest one is from April all the way back in 2020. I honestly have no reason to keep that around. I'm just going to trash it. We don't need that anymore. It's too old, and I've got plenty of others. All right, so for file handling, this just kind of gives us a brief idea what we're going to look at with our preview cache, how the size of little bits of data that it saves it in, and our standard preview size. Now we're going to see that standard preview. We're going to see that again down the road, so just remember that. This is Lightroom creating that JPEG preview and what size it creates it automatically. So by doing a 1920, I figure that makes sense because that's the size of my monitor. I could certainly click this and do something a little smaller. Maybe if I did the 1440 or the 1680, then I'm going to do something a little smaller that actually fits the view of Lightroom that I have here, but I have it doing it slightly larger, and I'm okay with that. It's a performance thing. You know, if I were to do a smaller, like a 1024 here, it would definitely make them a lot faster, but I just wouldn't have the detail that I could look at. So it's a balance of what do you want, detail versus speed. If you were to do 2880, well, that's certainly a very high res standard preview, and that would take you a little longer to make comparatively. All right, your preview quality, I like to have it at least on medium, if not on high. This is your JPEG quality that it is going to write to that preview file, and if we have, the high setting going on, then there's a chance that we're going to be able to see a little extra data, a little extra color fidelity, a little extra goodness coming through in our previews that we're writing. Now, when you zoom into one-to-one previews and things like that, that's where, if you were to do high quality on that, that would really slow you down. And that's where I'm saying, okay, the medium is probably okay, because that's where when I'm looking at one-to-one previews, Lightroom has to generate that when you zoom in on an image, and you're going to see pixel for pixel. And so what you're dealing with there is the medium probably does you pretty good. I welcome you to go ahead and test it out, see if you notice any difference. You're probably not going to notice a difference unless you have a major awesome monitor that just shows you just awesome quality, like sRGB, plus maybe the P3 screens or maybe the Adobe RGB screens. And if I'm just talking Greek to you, don't worry about it. Stick it on medium. You'll have a faster operating machine. You'll have greater performance. You're probably going to be okay with it. All right, when we go over here to the metadata, this is something all about what the library entails. What does it do? How does it behave? And we're talking about the data that is referencing to our photos. What is it that we're dealing with here? I'm going to actually probably come back to some of these in a little bit, but there's probably one thing maybe two things I want to highlight, and that is if you have a GPS camera like my Canon 5D Mark IV, it can tag with GPS coordinates in the image as it takes it. Well, then Lightroom can actually look up the address, and that's kind of pretty cool. You can also do this face detection. So if you have pictures of the family and you wanted to have it run through your catalog of images and pick out all the faces, you can then go and identify who those people are, and then you can search for it. And you can say, okay, give me all the pictures of my son, give me all the pictures of my daughter, my father, my mother, whomever that you have pictures of. And it does a pretty good job, but it is also a resource hog. So the first time it happens, let it go, walk away, go eat lunch, go shopping, whatever the case is, and come back when it's done. As it does it, when you ingest new images, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But again, it is more processing it will have to do as you're importing new images. So by default, that's a setting that I have off all the time. All right, that'll wrap it up for this video where we took a look at all these wonderful things about what the catalog is, where we should save it, how we should treat it, and where we can go with it, what we can do with it. Now it's time to dive into things like importing images and seeing what we do there. So we'll get to that in the next video. Until then, happy shooting.